It is my deep, deep, deep pleasure to introduce to you Dr. Stephen Jones. Come up, please.
I have a lot to cover tomorrow, as Richard has covered quite a bit, and I think he'll be able to speak to us some more and cover some more material. This article that you see, this paper that I wrote, starting in the summer of 2005, was published finally formally in a peer-reviewed book in August of 2006. As soon as my paper came out online, I received emails, many emails, but in particular from a fellow who identified himself as an engineer who had contacts with Homeland Security. He wrote to me and to administrators at my university the following, and I've quoted him here: "The publication of this article can be stopped, and I have the contacts to make this happen." And then he also said, "You need to give this very serious consideration. This is an issue that is more important than any individual career." I'm pretty sure he was referring to my career. Later, as I did not pull my paper from the internet, he offered grant money. He said, there's a very good chance that you will get grant money if you will change research direction, is the way he put it in his emails. And I thought this was quite bold of this fellow. Since then, I've read a book, or have been reading two books actually, by John Perkins. Some of you know of him. Confessions of an Economic Hitman. And John Perkins describes these methods that he himself had used, and then he decided that was ethically wrong and morally devastating, and he got out of it and is now exposing the methods of these people. And I should also say, so this paper was formally published in a book by Professors Griffin and Scott in August of 2006, a peer-reviewed volume, and a few weeks later I was put on administrative leave and offered early retirement. My latest paper with colleagues is also in the Journal of 9/11 Studies. I have submitted this to Journal of Physics D. I believe it fits very well in that journal. They simply wrote to me, this paper was beyond the scope of the journal, and at that time we decided we'd go ahead and publish in the Journal of 9/11 Studies to get this material out. Notice 5 PhDs on this paper, good people to work with at various universities, including the University of Maryland, University of Iowa, and Brigham Young University, a bold friend of mine there. I will be talking a little later in the talk about red gray chips, which I discovered in the World Trade Center dust, and the importance of these chips and providing new information about these. So please stay tuned if you haven't heard too much about those, or if you'd like to learn more. This is the course of my research right now, is studying the World Trade Center dust and learning what happened. That during the collapse of those buildings, there were produced these artifacts, these evidences captured in the dust. We talked about the iron aluminum microspheres abundantly found in the dust. And anyway, I'm just really quite excited about that. It carries a great deal of information as to what went on that day. And this dust, there's still a lot of it that people kept for various reasons. So it's not like the steel. The steel from these buildings was 200,000 tons, I think, of steel from the 3 buildings that fell straight down that day. The steel was cut up and sent to Asia for recycling very quickly. About 0.5% of it was saved for analysis by NIST, I'll call it, the National Institute of Standards and Technology. But only the rest of it was destroyed. The evidence was destroyed. But the dust, on the other hand, we have a lot of these samples still. We'll be talking about the content of the deaths. That's just a preview. I'd like to start by pointing out that the study of 9/11 is not just about controlled demolition. There are a lot of facts that point to suspicious behavior on this day and leading up to that day and since. I'll just mention a couple of these then by way of broadening the scope of our discussion this evening. As you know, there were no air defenses that day, no stopping of these planes that hit the buildings. Yet we read in Associated Press release, the scrambling of fighter aircraft at the first sign of trouble is a routine phenomenon. In the year period before 9/11, fighters were scrambled 67 times. So that's on average more than once a week. It's a routine pattern to do that. We have this tremendous multi-trillion-dollar system, I think, in the United States to defend us against hijacked aircraft and the problems that could ensue from hijackings. A Boston Globe, a few days after 9/11, said, a NORAD spokesman says its fighters routinely intercept aircraft. When planes are intercepted, they typically are handled with a graduated response. In other words, the fighters don't just go up and shoot down these planes. They try to help them to land, they find out what the problem is, and there's a graduated response to the problem. Russian Air Force Commander-in-Chief said, shortly after, in fact, the day after 9/11, generally it is impossible to carry out an act of terror on the scenario which was used in the USA yesterday. As soon as something like that happens here, I'm reported about that right away, and in a minute we are all up. Response time is typically less than 5 minutes. Now, if we look at the plane, there's a lot of data here, I won't cover it all, but if we look at the planes that were involved, United Airlines, UAL, and American Airlines planes, what's striking is this last plane, that is the one that was cruising towards the Pentagon, American Airlines 77. The data that we have shows that it hit the Pentagon 52 minutes later, 5-2. Now that's plenty of time to respond to this plane. I realize it's confusing that day, but around Washington, D.C., if you look at the map, you'll see there are 2 Air Force bases. Andrews Air Force Base and Bolling Air Force Base. And this is probably the most highly defended, protected Air Force airspace in the world. And yet, this plane, nothing was done to stop it. We know a little more about this situation from the Secretary of Transportation at the time, he's since resigned, Norman Mineta, and he is testifying to the 9/11 Commission. Now, what I'm about to show you is not in the 9/11 Commission report. In fact, the 9/11 Commission took it off their website. However, before then it was captured by astute observers, and it is available in video form. He went down to the Presidential Emergency Operations Center, which is basically a bunkhouse under the White House, at about 9:20 a.m. on the 11th. Vice President Cheney was there and in charge. Quoting now Secretary Mineta to the 9/11 Commission. During the time that the airplane was coming into the Pentagon, there was a young man who would come in and say to the Vice President, the plane is 50 miles out. The plane is 30 miles out. Now, they're tracking this plane. They know it's there, and there's plenty of time to scramble jet fighters from one of the 2 Air Force bases near Washington, D.C., intercept this plane in a graduated response, see if they can prevent it from killing people. When it got down to, back to the Secretary Mineta, when it got down to the plane is 10 miles out, the young man also said to the Vice President, do the orders still stand? He's concerned. And by the way, he has some courage, I think, to confront the Vice President in this way. And the Vice President turned and whipped his neck around and said, of course the orders still stand. Have you heard anything to the contrary? Approximately 2.5 minutes later, hundreds of people died. There's plenty of time to react. to stop this tragedy.